Entering the 2024 season, there was a lot of excitement surrounding the Syracuse Orange program. And while it's not nearly as exciting this year as it is last year, there's still plenty of hope that this program is headed in the right direction. Now, Fran Brown did a great job of picking his coordinators and picking his coaching staff. Jeff Nixon was someone that a lot of people thought could be a head coach in waiting. Same thing with Elijah Robinson on the defensive side of the ball. Now, this is a team that surprised everybody in the ACC, finishing 10-3. The offense was electric. It was super fun to watch. Kyle McCord obviously did a great job as their quarterback. The defense at times looked really good, and then there are also some times where you didn't necessarily see that same spark. But it was still a very talented group, a very exciting group, and they returned quite a bit of talent that will make this an interesting team this season. Now, like I said before, there's a lot of change on this roster. Plenty of guys came in, but also plenty of guys depart. And we talked about Kyle McCord. He's one of those names that is gone, obviously off to the NFL where he belongs. Same with LaQuint Allen and Rondé Gadsden, Fadil Diggs. You look at the guys they lost, and NFL talent shows you exactly why they were so good last year, specifically offensively. Losing Gadsden hurts, losing Allen hurts. McCord obviously was a fun story to follow, but I also think that they feel pretty good about where they sit, even with some of those guys departing. Maybe not necessarily at the same level, but it's also early where we don't know what certain replacements are going to look like. The transfer portal took quite a bit of talent too, but we'll see what happens there. Losing Murad Watson late in the process was obviously kind of disappointing. And then obviously the Trevor Pena situation was something that Fran Brown was in the spotlight for. You know, Fran Brown's been in the spotlight quite a bit this offseason. For that, you also talk about the potential spring game that was going to be against Colorado. So that was a really interesting dynamic. And I just like that he's in the spotlight. Syracuse football is not a program that you talk about a ton. So you have to find opportunities to put yourself in that conversation. And Fran Brown has done a really good job of that. Now they also bring in some talent. You lose 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen. So offensive line was an area that they targeted quite a bit. Cam Pringle, TJ Ferguson coming in. You also got Austin Collins and Zach Rice, as well as an interesting prospect in Naquil Bertrand from Alabama. So I think that they did a good job of bringing in talent to replace what they had. We'll see if they can play to the level that those guys did, but they did a good job of finding starters that can step in right away and compete. You also bring in Ricky Collins, who was labeled as the starter for this team, but then you also bring in Steve Angeli, who transfers out from Notre Dame, doesn't win the Notre Dame starting job, and honestly, Syracuse benefits from that. So a lot of excitement with these roster changes, plenty of reason for optimism with this program. And like I said, it's a different vibe this year, but it's still one of excitement. There's still plenty of excitement, especially coming off a 10-3 season. Maybe it's now expectation versus hopefulness, but that's kind of why you brought Fran Brown in. You wanted something different, and now you got it. So that's exactly where you wanted to be. That's where you want this program to be headed. And Fran Brown is hoping to surprise people yet again. The offense is going to have to retool itself, though. And it starts with the quarterback position. Now, there was, it was said that Ricky Collins was the starter, won the starting job, or at least it seemed like it was that way out of spring practice. But then they go in and bring in Steve Angeli. So I don't know what to really think with that. I think what I believe and what actually is going to happen is probably going to be the same, which is that it's a quarterback competition. I don't think I believe that they have a starter picked. Angeli doesn't come to Syracuse if you already have a starter picked. He doesn't leave Notre Dame to go to Syracuse to be a backup where he was going to be a backup anyways. I think he believes he has a legitimate shot of starting, and he will push Ricky Collins for that starting spot. The quarterback position has big shoes to fill, and it seems kind of weird if you went back to 2024 and said that the people or person replacing Kyle McCord was going to have a lot on their plate. You might have been like, what are you talking about? You might have looked at that person very strange. But that's where it is. Kyle McCord had an electric season. He was one of the more exciting players in college football. And now Collins and Angeli have to figure out how to replace him. Now, Collins has a lot of excitement within his game. I think that they really like his arm and what he's capable of doing throwing the football. But Angeli maybe doesn't have that arm talent compared to Ricky Collins, but also I think that he has a higher floor with his experience. He got good experience in the college football playoff last year when Riley Leonard went down for a little bit. So he has that experience he brings to the table, and that helps him a lot. Keeping poise as a quarterback is probably one of the biggest things that you have to do if you are a college football Division I quarterback. You have to find a way to keep your composure in big moments. And we saw that. We saw him do that at the biggest stage, on the biggest stage. And you're looking at a guy who brings that element that maybe Ricky Collins doesn't necessarily have. So we'll see how this plays out. I think it goes well into the season. You probably have two quarterbacks picked there. The depth behind them is very young. So that's why you bring in another quarterback at worst. Jakari Williams and AJ Miller are redshirt freshmen. Rich Bellion is another freshman. So you're not really hoping for those guys to see the field, but maybe you have options if you have to go that far. It's just really young. Collins and Angeli should be the two guys. You hope that one of them gets the starting spot, obviously, and they'll sort themselves out. From here, they have plenty of options to find downfield as well, so it's not like they'll be hurting for targets. The running back position is kind of in a similar boat. They have plenty of talented players coming back, but replacing LaQuint Allen is not going to be a one-man job. It'll be by committee. Yassine Willis and Will Nixon are the two guys that will step up into that role. Willis had 130 yards and 1 touchdown last year. Nixon only 76 yards, but averaged 4 yards per carry. So plenty of opportunities for guys to grow, to step into bigger positions. Maybe Jaden Hart is one of those guys. Redshirt sophomore Tyler Chandler could be in the mix. Malachi James. You have plenty of options, and it's a rushing attack that might need to play a more prominent role and already has to take a step forward. He finished 126th last year in rushing yards per game. So even with LaQuint Allen, it wasn't like this team was trying to run the football. That's probably something they want to identify as an area for growth in 2025, and getting the ball on the ground a little bit more is probably what they're looking to do in terms of running the football more so than they did last year and being more efficient with their rushing attack. Now, the passing attack could be just fine where you don't need to do that as much, but with two new quarterbacks and a new starter, regardless of who it is, it might require you to put the ball in the hands of the running backs more so than you did in 2024. Now, again, a lot of that is going to stem from, is the quarterback position solidified by the time the season starts or by the time the big games begin? And it will not take very much time at all to get that going. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, but you're probably not going to have the first overall passing attack in 2025. So you can't have the 126 rushing attack in 2025 either. So you have to find a way to solidify that. But the passing attack has plenty of excitement, even if the quarterbacks are relatively unknown. Daryl Gill Jr. is a guy that I don't think a lot of people know, but an explosive player for the Syracuse Orange last year. Over 18 yards per catch, and I think that he is ready for another big year. It just comes down to chemistry, honestly. There is plenty of talent in this wide receiver room. They bring in a couple transfers that we'll touch on here in a little bit. But you have plenty of options. You have plenty of talent, and that was the case last year. And you just needed certain guys to step up, and they did. They stepped up in a big way, and we saw exactly what this team's capable of doing. Now, Daryl Gill Jr. wasn't necessarily the top guy, but now he has the chance to be that guy for this team. Omari Hatcher and Emmanuel Ross, two guys that contributed last year, they're putting their names into the mix again. I think they're really excited about what Emmanuel Ross could be in 2025. But again, we'll see what happens with this group. Now, the second trio, if you will, plenty of excitement. Certain guys, Jonte Cook's one that's a very interesting story. The off-field issues are probably the biggest storyline with him. But the talent level that he brings to the table is so exciting if he can put it all together. The hard part with college football, especially nowadays, I think we forget how challenging it can still be for certain players to be successful. And Jonte Cook's a perfect example of that, where he has all the talent in the world. And at his peak, he's probably the most talented wide receiver on this roster by a long shot. But you have to be able to keep everything together. It's not just about playing on Saturdays. It's not just about doing well in practice and playing on Saturdays. There's so many things that go into it. And I really hope for Jonte's sake that he can find what he's looking for and find his way on the field. Because if he is ready to go, this offense is going to be even more of a nightmare to stop. You also have Justice Ross Simmons, another big time threat. Only had 9 catches, but averaged 22.4 yards per catch. I think that he could step up into a bigger role. He's definitely going to be in competition for it. You also bring in Chris Long from Rutgers. So you have plenty of options. There's plenty of potential. Now, a lot of it is not necessarily as proven as some of the other guys that you had last year or even Darrell Gill. You have certain players that are looking to prove themselves. And I think Fran Brown really likes that. I think he enjoys the competition that it naturally breeds. And that's what you have here. You have plenty of exciting players. And then behind those guys too, Jalen Hornsby is a guy that's looking to get his name into the mix. Jameer Thomas, Dyshawn Russell comes from South Carolina. So there's so many options that you could have, but which one of those guys will step up is probably the biggest question. Then the tight end position. Losing Oronde Gadsden, you're never going to replace Oronde Gadsden, and they're not going to try to. But Dan Villari gives them an interesting wrinkle. They've done a lot of things with him over the last couple years in terms of how do they utilize him in their offense. Now, he's probably going to be more of a traditional tight end than he has been in the past, but we'll see if he's going to be the guy, if it's going to be a rotation. Jamie Tremble is going to be in the mix. David Clement could be a factor as well. Elijah Washington Baker is a massive player at 6'7". So you have plenty of options. It's just a matter of which one of those guys is going to step up, or one guy is going to step up, multiple guys. Again, it's probably Syracuse's approach to replacing some of these top guys will be by committee, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think most people, there's a stereotype with by committee that means that, oh, well, we're kind of in trouble. We don't necessarily have anybody that's any good. It's your ceiling might be lower, but maybe your floor is higher. Maybe that means you have more depth at positions, which at wide receiver, it feels like you have really good depth. You just maybe don't have the ceiling that you did last year. So that's just, it is the nature of the situation. When you lose Trevor Pena and Jackson Meeks, that's going to happen. Losing Oronde Gadsden doesn't make things easier either. So that's really where this gets challenging. But again, maybe the depth is better. Maybe you have better pieces overall. It's just that the ceiling might be a little bit lower, but that doesn't mean that your offense is worse. It just means it looks different. Another group that's going to have their hands full is the offensive line. You return one starter from last season, and you bring in a ton of new faces to this program. You bring in multiple transfers. You have a lot of new guys that are stepping up into different roles, and it'll be interesting to see how they play things out. Now, I should actually say that you have 2 returning starters, one that started the entire season. Demetrius Weatherspoon is going to be your left tackle from what it sounds like. Mark Petrie is going to be the right guard. From there, it's just going to be who steps up and takes these starting spots. The center position is probably going to be the biggest question mark with a new quarterback. You'd like to have an experienced center, but right now I don't think they necessarily have that. Joshua Miller and Patrick Alberga are going to be 2 guys to keep an eye on there. The guard positions has plenty of talent. Like I said, Petrie is going to be a good piece to have back. TJ Ferguson was a big transfer that they are really excited they got. You also bring in Austin Collins from Louisville, another experienced player. Joe Cruz is an experienced player for this Syracuse team who comes back. So the guard positions feel like they're set, even if you have some questions about certain positions. Then on the tackle positions, like I said, Weatherspoon's going to take one of the spots. Right now, Cam Pringle figures to be the right tackle opposite of Weatherspoon. Zach Rice from North Carolina could be a factor there. Has plenty of experience, but just not a ton of starting experience. Actually has 0 games started. Travion Mack is another option, a returnee for this team. Then you have that, we talked about this earlier, Naquil Bertrand is someone who could be a really interesting piece. And when you come from Alabama, there's kind of a natural belief that you're going to be pretty good. And Bertrand is one of those guys that I think has the potential to be really exciting. It's just, and you have a lot of competition. So there are a lot of positions that feel relatively wide open. And this is a group that is going to play a big role. You have plenty of change at the skill positions. You also have plenty of change coming up front. So not only do you have to have guys who will take over as starters, but they have to learn how to gel with their teammates. They have to learn how to communicate with their new teammates. Those are things that we don't talk about a ton in the offseason, but those are things that go into being successful. You have to learn the scheme. You have to learn your teammates. You have to learn how they communicate, what you need to tell them, what they need to tell you. Lots goes into that. And when you have 3 new starters and another guy that's stepping up into a bigger role, you have, and other guys that are behind them that are relatively new, you have plenty of opportunity for growth. There's also just going to be challenges that naturally. That just is what it is. But Syracuse is so far in a 1-year sample size done a pretty good job of showcasing that they're capable of making that happen. We'll see what happens with that. The offense is, like I said, full of potential, but I think that it's going to take some time, even with the talented offensive linemen. There's probably some concerns that they're good. They might struggle right off the bat. But if Fran Brown can continue what he does best, which we saw last year, this was a team that surprised us a ton. And the offensive line played a big role in that. And now you have to find a way to do it again. The defense is where you really want to see them take a step forward. And there was a bit of talent on this team that departs, and the secondary got hit a ton. The defensive line took a couple of hits. You know, you knew you were losing Fadil Diggs. That was probably that was always going to be a 1-year thing. He was going to the NFL after this past year. But Murad Watson's emergence was really exciting until he departs. So now how do you replace those guys? Well, Dennis Jacquez Jr. is someone with tremendous potential. I think that he is set for a big year, set to have an incredible season for this Syracuse Orange team. 23 tackles last year, 3 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. They also bring in David Reese out on the edge from Cal, a guy who is productive and has been at multiple schools already. His final year will be with Syracuse here. So he's an experienced player that you feel pretty excited about on the edge. The depth behind them, Chase Simmons is a name that I think they really like, thinks that they have quite a bit of excitement in his game. And Isaiah Hastings could be in that as well. So we'll see. You lose, like I said, you lose Fidel Diggs. That's going to hurt. But at the same time, you feel like you have pieces that are ready to take that step, ready to emerge. And you look at even David Oma Pariola, 12 tackles, 4 tackles for loss. So maybe not the best production, but also you have opportunities in front of them. You have guys that, even in their limited sample size, showed that they can be productive. So the edge feels like it's in a good place, and that's going to help a passing attack that finished 82nd last year. And with the turnover they have on the back end, that could be a little bit challenging, but you can help that by starting things up front. Losing Murad Watson, like I said, that's a killer. I think that they're really bummed that he departs, but you bring in George Rooks from Boston College. Rashard Perry is back as well, so you feel like you have good experience at the tackle positions. You also feel like you have pretty decent depth. They may not be the highest ceiling depth, but Dion Wilson and Kevin Jobody coming back feels like you're in good hands. And then if not, you have Christopher Thomas coming in from Marshall. So you have, I think, good depth. It just maybe isn't the highest ceiling depth. That's why you're bummed Murad Watson is gone, because you felt like he could be an absolute star for this team. Obviously, he ends up in the transfer portal, and now you're looking to replace him some way. Bringing in George Rooks is kind of like raising that floor, and sometimes that's a good thing. Again, this is part of college football. Sometimes is that you're not always looking to raise your ceiling, right? Sometimes you lower the ceiling, but you raise the floor, and that gives you more consistency. Now, you may not be able to win certain games, but you're going to win more consistently if you have consistent play. And the defensive line may be the most evident of that in 2025. The linebacker position is where things get interesting because you have some new faces. You have a familiar name that is going to be very obvious who he's related to in Fran Brown Jr. And the starters will be interesting. Now, Derek McDonald is going to be one of those guys, 6'4", 232 pounds, not the going to be like the most athletic in coverage guy, but he is going to make plays for sure. He's definitely going to get downhill and he's going to make plays. Gary Bryant comes in from South Dakota. Can he make that jump to the Power 4 level? Can he bring his game to an ACC level? 103 tackles last year, 4 tackles for loss. I think that he will be a really fun player to keep an eye on in the ACC. And then you have Anwar Sparrow, a guy who's had multiple years of experience with this team, entered the transfer portal initially, comes back. I think that was a good move for him. And obviously, Syracuse is glad that his experience is back. James Hurd is looking to take on a bigger role. So he's learned quite a bit from last year, and we'll see what he can do. Fran Brown Jr. comes in from St. Francis. I don't necessarily, he's not going to play just because his dad is Fran Brown, but I think that he is going to be a really interesting piece to this puzzle. And he knows he's going to earn it. He knows he's going to have to work hard for it. And that's good. That's exactly the level of intensity this group wants. And that's what this team needs. But the linebacker position has quite a bit of questions. And Derek McDonald is probably the steadying force. Anwar Sparrow's experience makes him a steadying force. And then you have guys that are looking to prove themselves. Whether they're returning guys or coming in from the transfer portal, you have plenty of opportunities for guys to prove themselves. And that's great, but also early in the season, that could be a little bit of an issue in terms of production, consistency, all that kind of stuff. We'll see what happens there. That's a group that will really benefit too from the group up front stepping up and have a big season. Again, raising that floor and playing more consistently benefits the linebackers if that's how the defensive line can step up and play. The secondary is interesting because you have a couple of experienced players that come back. You have a lot of experienced players, and then you also feel like you have a lot of inexperienced players that come back as well or come into the program. The two guys that everybody will lean on so far this year will be Deuce Chestnut and Devin Grant for various different reasons. Chestnut originally was at Syracuse, goes to LSU, comes back to Syracuse. 62 tackles last year, 4 tackles for loss, 5 passes defended, 1 interception. Devin Grant plays that nickel role, if you will, star role, whatever. Everybody has a different name for it. 56 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 1 interception. A good frame at 6'4", nearly 200 pounds. So those are 2 experienced players that you're going to lean on early. 2 other guys to keep an eye on that have pretty good experience but are taking on bigger roles because of departures. Barry Buxton III and Davian Kerr. Davian Kerr is going to be a guy that gets talked about quite a bit. I think that this staff believes he's ready for his opportunity, has plenty of exciting traits, and he's going to take over one of the cornerback spots, which will be interesting. It'll be a tough position to watch for Syracuse fans maybe early on because you got new faces that are taking on bigger roles. Kerr is one of them. Greg Delane is going to be another one. So you have 2 new starting cornerbacks that are looking to prove themselves. There might be some growing pains with that, but you have a staff that believes in these guys and a staff that thinks they have those guys in these positions for a reason. Now, maybe one or both of them don't work out. Maybe they both work out. You just never know what's going to happen. And the depth behind them doesn't exactly build your confidence. But again, if you can I think coaching staffs now realize that we may not have the experience, but we can get guys ready to go. So if those two can't play, Chris Peel comes in from Georgia. Fran Brown's obviously very familiar with him. Nate Prater is another corner that could step in right away and play the safety position. Maybe Brahim Long is one of your answers. Demetrius Samuel Jr. is a freshman that they're excited about. And then behind Devin Grant, Jalil Martin had a little bit of experience last year, but there's not a ton of experience. There's not a ton of production in this group. And certain guys that did get experience, like Buxton and Kerr, are going to have to elevate their game. They're going to have to take a step, and they'll have to find ways to be larger contributors in 2025. And that's not a bad thing. It just means that some of those guys you may be looking towards 2026, and 2025 is just like a learning year, which is kind of hard. It's kind of hard to watch, but we don't know. We don't know that for sure. And this, like I said, this is a group that has a lot of excitement, a lot of potential, and it might take a little while for them to grow. Now, all of that stuff that we talked about, all of the new faces, kind of leads towards the 5.5 win total that Vegas projects Syracuse to have right now. The schedule doesn't really do them a ton of favors, if any. So it's easy to see why 5.5 is the over under. I think the ceiling is 7-5. I think that this is a group that is inexperienced, that is young, and might take some time to gel with each other and figure things out. But also, this is the same program that surprised us last year. The tough part is you have to face Tennessee right off the bat. And Tennessee might be the angriest team coming into college football this year. With all the drama they had, with the frustrations from the Ohio State loss last year, I think that this is a team that is looking to make a statement right away. And Syracuse, if they're not up to speed, this could be a tough one to start with. UConn and Colgate aren't really anything to worry about. But then you get a road trip to Clemson, which is kind of like, if you're talking to the ACC schedulers, it's almost like they were mad that Syracuse went 10-3 and they said, oh, well, we'll show you. We're going to kick you in the teeth. We're going to send you to Clemson. Then you're going to host a Duke team that's better than people expect. You'll then go on the road to SMU. So have fun with that. And then we'll be nice and we'll give you a bye week. And then you host Pitt, who is looking to improve. Go to Georgia Tech, who is one of the better teams, better surprise teams, and one of the best surprises in 2024. And has their starting quarterback, running back, a good group of players coming back. North Carolina is interesting. And then you finish your year at Miami off, and then you go to Notre Dame and host Boston College. So it's easy to see why 7-5 is probably the best. Unless you're surprising us a ton, you're probably not beating Tennessee. You're probably not beating Clemson. You're probably not beating Miami or Notre Dame if they are exactly what we expect them to be. So 4-8 is definitely possible, which hurts me to say, but it's definitely possible. And I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but I'm not ruling it out either. Now, on the channel vote, you think it's essentially going to be 5th through 8th for Syracuse. That would probably put them at that 7-5, 6-6 range, maybe a little bit better than that. 27% of you thinks 1st through 4th. I would love to have your confidence in my team if I looked at that roster and thought that this is a team that could finish 1st through 4th, maybe 3rd or 4th if you're a surprise team again. I don't think people thought they would be 10-3 last year, so could be wrong, but it feels like that's just not going to happen. 9th through 12th, 15% of you say that, and then 8% say 13th through the end. So 13th through 17th there. And honestly, I don't really know if that's going to happen either, but if you're 4-8, that's definitely a possibility. So we'll see. Syracuse is in a different place than it was last year, which is, some of it's kind of not great, but at the same time, some of it is okay. Part of that is change. There's fluctuation in college football. And I think the future of Syracuse is still bright under Fran Brown. Maybe they surprise us again, but if not, I think that 2026 still has plenty of excitement for this program, and Fran Brown has them in a really good place.